Well, welcome to the Spiritual Principles Made Practical podcast. Today, we have Chris Harris as our guest, who has an awesome resume, let me tell you. And having a background in martial arts, I really appreciate that because I share that as well. But he's been successful for a long time as a speaker, author, trainer. And tell us about yourself and the amazing stuff you have to offer.
Yeah, so I taught elite close quarters combat to military special forces for 25 years as a private contractor. And in that journey, I learned a lot about mindset. And I taught mindset principles, but I learned probably just as much, if not more, than what I taught. Just, when you think of special forces, you think of mindset. And in my 40s, I had to stop doing that, and I pivoted to corporate America. And I realized that the mindset piece was very much missing, especially in sales and in leadership, and but also with a lot of people who just were lacking personal fulfillment. And we are mind, we are body, and we are spirit, and we need to take care of all of them. So I learned that there were just a lot of people that needed to just understand how these principles worked and why they were important and how they benefited not just them but their families, their relationships. And so got into keynote speaking and then executive coaching, and now I've always been writing. The book I just released was my 14th book, but that's over a course of 25 years. So writing's not new to me, but writing about this, the mind and how it affects the body and the spirit. That's all kind of a new lane for me to be writing about.
So what's what's the cutting edge of your understanding about all that now? Because you're obviously digging into the power of the mind and its impact and such. Um, and there's kind of always more to learn wherever we are, right? So where are you in that now?
I think for me, just achieving or attaining a new level of consciousness. You know, the understanding that if someone were to have told me years ago, that the kingdom of God lives within you, like I wouldn't have known how to take that, and I don't know that I could have built on that. But now I very much believe that the kingdom of God does live within all of us, and I believe that our potential um, is only limited by the beliefs that we hold in our subconscious mind. And if we can tap into that operating system that's kind of driving 95% of what goes on in our life throughout the course of a day, if we can tap into that with a new level of awareness and understanding, I believe we're far more powerful than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've seen, in various examples throughout time of people that have done seemingly impossible things with their mind as a result of their mind and stuff. And so
Hmm.
if we can imagine it, we could probably do it. But how do you what's your process in helping people go from where they are to a greater understanding to where they're not as ruled by their unconscious and more ruled by their conscious?
Yeah, I think the first thing I normally like to do is I help people understand what mindset is. If I'm speaking to a room of business professionals and I say, "Hey, raise your hand if you agree that mindset is just a very core, very important component of attainment and success and performance." Probably everyone in the room would raise their hand.
Right.
And then if I were to say, "Okay, now raise your hand if you can articulate the difference between mindset, attitude, and belief," the hands go down very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, so we think we know what mindset is. So the first thing I try to do is I try to help people understand what mindset really is and how it differs from attitudes and beliefs. And and so I'll start with that, and I'll just give the simplest definition I can, just to keep this very easy to digest. But the way I teach mindset is it is the space between stimulus and response. And, that space, if 95% of what goes on in our mental being, um, and spiritual being, if 95% of that is driven and derived from the subconscious mind, well, that means that 95% of it is automated. You're blinking, you're breathing, your heart rate, your blood pressure, all that's regulated. So the first thing we want to do is we want to say, well, if mindset in its simplest definition is that space between stimulus and response, we want the stuff that's automated that shouldn't be automated because it's based on old beliefs, old fear, old, biases, trauma, you know, something a teacher told us, something a parent taught us, something a coach said. And so we want to be very aware of what is automated. And because a lot of that no longer serves us, a lot of it is no longer useful. In fact, a lot of it is destructive, because our identity shifts throughout our lifetime. We go through different phases of life. And as we do that, our identity needs to shift. Our ego needs to shift and mature. And so as that is shifting, we need to stop the automation of things that no longer serve us and that are no longer useful. But at the same time, we need to create new automated behaviors that are in alignment with the person that we're becoming.
Right.
And so what I do is, once I kind of help people understand what mindset is and why it's important, then I kind of take them on a journey of, look, you already have all the tools in your toolbox to go in and stop the automation of what you no longer want, and to create the automation of things that are where you're heading. And so I kind of take them on a very simple journey just to use whatever the tools they already have. And it's really just comes down to awareness and understanding how the operating system works.
Yeah, one of the things that I've found interesting and exciting both is that uh, people oftentimes they do things right, but they don't realize what they're doing that's right, so they don't have the choice to do more of it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of in line with what you're saying, is that people have, by the time they get to you or me, uh, they've got some things figured out and they're doing some things well. They're just looking to build on that.
Yeah. I I kind of come at everything from a principle of well, I use a quote and I kind of lay that as the foundation. But it's a quote from Alan Watts, and he's a British philosopher from the 70s. But he said that we are under no obligation to remain the same version of ourselves we were 5 minutes ago. And I firmly believe that. We are, I think, as humans, we have a responsibility to develop ourselves to the fullest of our ability in our lifetime. And I think that we are supposed to develop ourselves to the fullest of our ability so that we can basically throw down the rope and help others do the same. I think that we do have that responsibility, but that responsibility transcends ourself.
Yeah, I mean, one of my big things is to grow in the consciousness that we're all one, and that we all rise and fall together and stuff. And the way that I've tried to make it comprehensible is to say, well, one way of experiencing that is to engage in win-win thinking, to where we all come together. But one of the things that I believe in, and I'm curious your take on it, is I believe that example is the most powerful form of leadership. And so I would ask you, what are some of the examples from your life that you share with your audiences that are most impactful?
Well, I think as far as audiences, those would be different than if it was kind of a me just working with a small group,
Okay.
or even one
Either
on one.
way, either way.
Um, but one of the things, typically when you're telling people, about the power of perspective, a perspective it's a superpower that we have. The ability to let something go, right? Just acceptance and letting it go. And typically people will look at me and say, "Yeah, but you don't understand." You know, what do you mean I don't understand? Well, you don't understand what I went through, or you don't understand who raised me, or you don't understand, And so I think what probably surprises them the most is, I give them a glimpse into my childhood, and and very quickly they come to the place to where they realize I do understand. I was born in adversity. I was raised in rejection. And so, once I can relate with them, homelessness and heroin addict mother who went to prison and all the horrible things that happened but through perspective, I chose a stance of gratitude, and it's made all the difference. If you would have asked, so my two sisters, so when I was 10, my mother was sent to prison, and my two sisters were 11 and 12. And both of them followed in my mother's footsteps. They just a life of just addiction and abuse and neglect and but if you were to ask them how their lives just turned out so horribly, they would have squared you in the eye. And with all the conviction of their faith, they would have said, it's because my mother was a drug addict. If the same person looked at me and say, how'd your life turn out so blessed? I would say, that's easy. My mother was a drug addict. So, we have the power of perspective. And I think so one of the things that helps me when I'm speaking to groups or I'm speaking to people individually is, when they learn that I've kind of been through it too. And so it removes that excuse of, well, you don't understand.
Right.
And now they realize that you can relate, and it kind of puts you on equal footing.
Yeah. It really does make a difference when people believe that you get them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You understand and stuff.
When you've metaphorically walked in their shoes.
Now, did you have this empowering perspective as a child, or did you develop it later?
I got it as a child, probably about 12 years old. I think I was about 12, but I was homeless, and I was sleeping under bridges, and I was eating out of dumpsters. But I remember just a real defining moment in my life. I was all excited because I found a bag of donuts, in the dumpster, and they were protected, and they were still fresh. And so I sat down on the curb. This is in Dayton, Ohio, and I sat down on the curb, and I'm eating these donuts, and I just had a real moment. I can't explain, but it was almost like a soul binding moment to where I made the decision that, there's more to life than this. I've come to the place where I've accepted this as normal. And, and I made a decision that there is more for me. There is a better life for me. And I'm going to do whatever I have to do. I'm going to do the work. And I'm going to pursue a better life because it just I don't want to say I was disgusted, but I was close to being disgusted with the fact that I thought that this was a good thing. This was okay that I was eating donuts from the trash on the curb,
Yeah.
and I made a decision that I was going to do something with my life, and then I also made the decision that when I did get to the top, I was going to find a way to throw down the rope and help others get to the top who were willing to do the work. And that was as a kind of a preteen, and it was a defining moment in my life. And then at 20, or not 20, but at 18 years old on my birthday, my gift to myself, I was still in high school. I had a few more months to go, but my gift to myself was I joined the military and or enlisted in the military. And then a couple of months later, when I graduated, I went into the military. And that was, for the first time in my life that I had kind of a sense of belonging and brotherhood, acceptance and self-value. I never had any of those things growing up. And I learned that they were mine as long as I just showed up and did my part. And so it was a journey, and then later in life, I came to have a relationship with God. That was a very defining moment in my life. And then I got married. My wife is a very spiritual person. We've been married for 30 years now. So, I don't know that it was one moment, but it's a series of milestones.
Right, right. No, I relate to that in my own life where, I've got very specific milestones that uh where my life really changed,
Hmm.
and for the better. And it was a good choice that I made, and I'm happy I made that choice. But it's been the one of the most recent ones, in some respects, was a number of years ago now, probably 20 years ago now, is I was reading a prayer of Saint Francis, and it ended in the interpretation that I read. It said, "In dying to self, we're born to eternal life," and that phrase just reached out and grabbed me. And I said to myself, somehow, some way, I'm going to learn what that means, and it really has propelled me forward into. Um, uh, Looking into, that, I see my mission is expanding acceptance of the fact that we're all one, and that part of what, and I'd be interested in your comments about this, because I believe that the value of any goal is the growth that's required of us to achieve that goal. And that spiritual growth is a increased acceptance of who we are and what we're capable of. And so in order to um, I had in order to reach my goal of advancing win-win thinking, and the concept that we're all one and we all rise and fall together, globally. The growth that I feel I have to do internally is I have to relate to being one with all people, and I find that to be an exciting challenge, with a lot of steps along the way. And so I've worked hard at trying to be more empathetic, and see myself and other people and understand what that means. And I'd be curious to get your take on that.
You know, I, well, first of all, we're all energy. Let's just start with that. I mean, mind, body, and spirit, we are energy. And we know that the based on the just basic laws of energy, right? We're all shared in that. And but I do believe that not everybody operates on the same frequency. Um, if I walk into a room, um, I tend to gravitate toward the positive, and I tend to move away from the negative. And if we were to look at that from the standpoint of like vibration and frequency and energy, uh, yes, we are one, but we're only one when we're shared in our purpose. If we're not shared in our purpose, I find it hard to be unified with someone who, and I'll just give you an example. And if you have two people in the room and they're both pursuing wealth, financial wealth, but one is pursuing financial wealth for a lot of really good altruistic reasons, and the other's pursuing wealth for nothing but selfish, greedy reasons. Well, there's not a shared purpose there. There might be a shared goal, but not a shared purpose behind the goal. So where I have challenges is when I'm on a journey with someone who we may be shared in the goal, but we're not shared in the purpose.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's the values, it's the why, it's the character, it's the meaning that we associate, it's the meaning that we attach to the goal that makes the goal so valuable. So we're not all shared. We're not all we're not all aligned in a shared purpose, and that's where it becomes challenging.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I mean, in my view, is that, everybody has a spark of God within them, but some people are going to express it clearly, and some people are just never going to express it clearly. It's like, and I always think about the fact that, as I grow, I'm able to reach and connect with a wider variety of people. And so I like to say, I can't really connect and relate and get along and beneficially with this person now, but Maybe in the future that'll change. Maybe it won't.
Yeah, I mean, look, Luke 17:21, Jesus says the kingdom of God lives within you. And I believe that not everybody accepts that. I believe that some people actually reject that, but that doesn't make it any less true.
Right, right. But I find that as a speaker, one of the things that I've realized over time is that the more deeply connected I am to myself, the more deeply connected I am to the audience. And so, if there's ever a point where I feel like I'm losing the audience, I dig down deeper within myself to try to find and articulate something more authentic and more honest than I have before as a means of connecting more to myself because I've learned that that results in me connecting more to the audience. And
Yeah, I do that as well. And if I'm missing that connection, I basically, we have three brains. We've got our analytical brain, and then we've got our emotional brain, and then we've kind of got our mammalian brain, our survival brain. And the if I feel that I'm kind of losing the audience and I've lost that vital connection, I my knee jerk reaction is I must be speaking from my analytical brain because people don't really connect with us that's when they kind of disengage. And so I basically say, all right, I'm going to have to go into my emotional brain here, my limbic system, so to speak.
right.
And the way that you reconnect with people very quickly is through emotion. And that's so if I can just be authentic and be vulnerable here for a moment. And so vulnerability is a really good way to show authenticity. And I mean, as long as you're sharing it for the connection, not manipulation, right? Some people can be charismatic to serve themselves. So it truly does need to be authentic to where I'm going to share this story and I'm going to be vulnerable because I want a greater connection with you. And in those situations, I think it works very well.
Yeah, I really like how you articulated the importance of your, the goal behind it. I thought that was a very um, clear and comprehensible, way of looking at it. As it's like what's motivating you. Um, Kind of had a question that was just on the tip of my mind, and it's gone. Oh, I know. So for you, you've achieved a tremendous level of success. What does the future look like for you in terms of where do you want to go from here?
You know, um, as a speaker, as a keynote speaker, I often talk about Maslow's work. Abraham Maslow wrote basically what motivates human beings, right? I often kind of teach that. We started a kind of a baseline, just survival needs, and then we get kind of move into security, and then we move into relationships, and we're moving up this pyramid. And ultimately, he said it was all about self actualization, right?
Right.
And that's basically where we've become the best version of ourselves. And even if we only can hold it for a day, the goal is to keep kind of striving toward that. And I didn't know this, for all these years I was teaching this, I didn't know this until recently. And it's really just been a beautiful discovery. But after Maslow died, they and I don't know if it was the family or whatever, but they dug into his journals and they saw that he basically wrote and said, "Hey, there's more," and I wish that I would have not missed it. Because his work has been widely accepted worldwide, by by the rich and the poor, and um, he said there's something that's beyond self-actualization, and it's self-transcendence. And self-transcendence is when, okay, look, you've achieved self-actualization. Now, how are you going to use it for the good of mankind and humankind? And he said that because if you got all of that and you're not sharing it, you're not using it to make a world a better place, then what did you even earn it for? And so to me, I'm kind of in that place now to where I'm thinking like that. Like I've achieved self actualization several times in several different areas of my life. I think you can achieve it professionally, but not have it spiritually. I think you can have it spiritually and not have it in relationships, but I think the goal is to have self actualization in all the key areas of your life. And I can say that now that I'm looking at the transcendence part, how do I share it? Right? How do I help others make it to the top? Um, so really the word that I would use is I'm really kind of in a mindset now of legacy. And that is what will I be leaving behind? What will I be remembered for?
One of the things that I've found is that, and it's been surprising to me, is that when I'm in the flow and really present, that the words that come out of my mouth and the energy that comes with it are optimal. And that, and it may not sound in the circumstance, it may not sound like the most spiritual thing, but it connects and it's uplifting and it's spontaneous and everybody leaves better off, which is that upliftment and contribution you're talking about, and so I try to be as present and as spontaneous and authentic in the flow as I can be on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are certain thoughts that go with that, like what you were talking about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is like, okay, well, how am I going to uh, how am I going to increase my global contribution?
Mm-hmm.
And they all fit together, right? If we're doing it right and stuff. But um, it's been interesting, but it's really helped me a lot. And I would be curious to hear what you say about, this concept that my and I believe everybody's contribution to the world is a reflection of the self-acceptance that they've obtained. And when I say self-acceptance, I mean all the way to, our divine self.
I agree with that. I don't believe that you're capable of giving more than you have.
Right.
So the more the more that I have attained or understood or consciousness I've achieved, I think then the more than I have to give.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, we all, interact with people in all different sort of stages of consciousness and development, and one of the ways that, um, I think I think valuable and important is to continue to challenge ourselves and other people that are really far along to say, keep growing, because you want to be an example of somebody that never stops growing. You have the um, I'm one of the things that I've noticed is that the people that I'm attracted to, one of their characteristics they all share is they're all committed to being lifelong learners.
Mm-hmm.
And the openness and the humility and the benefits that come with that. And so I think that there are um, health benefits and all kinds of benefits associated with being a lifelong learner.
Well, that's Maslow. I mean, self actualization. I mean,
Right.
you can't achieve self actualization if you're not in a consistent, continual pursuit of improvement.
Right. Right. And so I mean that's really um, it's interesting to me, just about how um, I flicker between various perspectives, right? Like what you were saying, right? Like sometimes you're self-actualized and you're there for a little while and then you're not there, and then, and it's like, and so there are sort of like a great number of perspectives that we find ourselves engaged in throughout, time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and one of the things that I uh, have studied and am trying to do always is to find language that will transcend the perspectives. And one of my thoughts that I really like is this concept that the solution to every problem is for me to be more honest with myself. And to me, I think that really uh, connects and is comprehensible through a vast array of perspectives.
Hmm.
Because I want to, I want to, like you, I want to make the maximum contribution I can in life, right? And so I want to do what is uplifting to the maximum number of people possible, given the communication skills I have. And I think that do you have a specific target audience that you are inspired to engage with?
Not necessarily, but as far as who actually hires me to speak, it's typically either sales teams, sales organizations, or leadership, executive leadership. And the reason for that is, if you take a look at most organizations, most companies, really the only two components of a healthy organization that are going to have a budget to pay for a speaker to come in and speak is usually either going to be leadership or it's going to be sales. So it's by default. Like if I spoke for free, it would probably be there is no audience. It's just whoever shows up. But because there is a fee associated with me, flying to wherever and getting a hotel and standing on stage in front of your for your annual event, it's normally leadership and sales are the only two components that usually have budget for that.
And when you're talking to salespeople, how do you help them shift their focus from um, results to productive activity, right? It's salespeople can control their behavior, but they can only influence their clients' and customers' behavior, but they don't control it. And so, how do you address all of that with salespeople?
Well, I talk about the 80-20 rule, Pareto's principle, which, basically means that, 20% of your activity throughout the course of a work week is going to produce 80% of your results. And so, if you were to write down, all the things that you do in the course of a week, returning emails, face to face meetings, virtual meetings, putting together price quotes, doing sales presentations, things like this. If you were write down all of those, now circle the one that probably only takes up 20% of your time, but has the ability to produce 80% of the revenue, right, for either your company or for your commissions. And it's always prospecting. It's always business development, right? It's always outreach. It's not sitting by the phone and waiting, for someone to call. It's not waiting for a lead. It's me actively pursuing new business development, new logos. And so if you think about the course of a 5-day work week, if you said, okay, all I'm going to do for one day a week is outreach, business development, cold calling, whatever that is, and then the other 4 days are really going to be for all of this other stuff. Well, that one day will drive 80% of your revenue. Okay. And so the first thing is just awareness, getting them to be aware of the fact that without this, none of this other stuff is even needed. Right. Um, and then once they kind of acknowledge that awareness piece, then you got to get them to accept it. Right. Because there's awareness, then there's acceptance. And then you're going to have to help them find a why, because prospecting is just filled with rejection. I mean, it's just a lot of no's to get to one yes, and nobody likes. I haven't met anyone that doesn't like rejection. I know people who handle rejection really well and just move on down the road, but that doesn't mean they like it. And so, so that now we got to talk about kind of resilience, and we got to talk about adversity, and we got to talk about where do you find that grit when it just gets really hard and you're beaten down. Well, our ability to be resilient is directly proportionate to our why that we attach to a desired outcome or a goal. So if the goal is, I'm going to spend one day a week just basically being rejected because I know that that one day is going to produce the majority of the money I earn,
Right.
And I know that it's going to be very frustrating because I'm just going to be rejected over and over and over again to get the one yes. I'm going to have something. I'm going to have some kind of why that allows that resilience, that grit, that persistence to attach its teeth to. And what is that? And so I tell people, I say, look, it can be whatever you want, but it's got to be something that'll make you stay in the fight. Because if you don't have that why, you're just going to say, "Oh, heck with this! I'm going to lunch early." And so, I would say, all right, it's not the money. It can't be the money. It needs to be what you're going to do with the money. And so, I had a single mom once. She was in sales, and she's like, "Well, I would love nothing more than to be able to get me and my child into a house. I mean, we live in an apartment, and man, if we could just live in a house and my kid could have a backyard." Okay, there's your why. So when you're getting beat down on those phone calls, think of your kid playing in that backyard. I had someone else said, "Well, I just, I no one in my family ever went to college, and I would just really love to be able to help, my kid go to college." Or someone else, my parents, they never really saved for retirement, and they're kind of coming into their years where they really need some assistance, and I'd love to be able to help with that. So find something that's meaningful to you, that grit and grind and hustle can attach its teeth to when you're going through that beat down. And because you can't have resilience if you don't have a why.
Right. Right. And I would think that most of us probably have a pretty good idea of what our why is. I mean, you don't really run against people that have trouble defining that, do you?
You'd be surprised.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, anyone can say, "Well, it's the commissions. It's
Well,
my
okay,
earning
yeah.
potential."
Yeah.
Anybody can say the money, but that's very superficial. Like, okay, but what are you going to do with the money? Where that's the passion piece, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, anybody can default and say, "Well, I want to make more money."
Well, yeah, yeah, but I think you're pretty effective at communicating to them, well, what are you going to do with it, and that's, yeah, and I think it gets them off that. I would
Yeah,
expect at least that would get them off.
yeah, but that's where they struggle. That's where they have to think. That's where I get a lot of people go, That's I never really thought of that." Well, I guess, and they kind of talk it out, and it doesn't take long to get them there. But you'd be very surprised at how many people who don't know that right off the cuff.
Yeah, no, I know because I mean, there in our society, it is such that so many people think that money's going to solve all their problems, and so people do get fixated, in that perspective.
Well, we've been taught from an early age as a society that success requires money, and so we attach meaning, money, success, money, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, the definition of success is the attainment of a goal, pure and simple. It doesn't matter what the goal is. If you set a goal and it's time bound and measurable, and you achieve or attain that goal, well, that's success as it relates to that goal. There's no universal law of success that if I wear a Rolex and I'm a CEO and I have a nice car and I live in a nice house, and then I'm successful. Well, that's what advertising has taught us, but that's not the truth. Because if that's the definition of success, well, now we're also going to have a screwed up definition of what failure is, and now we're going to be afraid of failure. And so I tell people, look, let's first clearly define what success is, and then secondly, let's clearly define what failure is. And now that we know what these two words actually mean, we're not going to be afraid to fail, and we're not going to be afraid to start.
So in your allocation of time, do you spend your 1 day a week prospecting, or how do you handle that part of it?
No, I'm not. I don't carry a sales bag anymore. I'm not a frontline contributor. So when I did sell, I most certainly did. I mean, I achieved quite a bit of success in the sales world, but that was, that's how I did it, and it was hard. But the rewards were proportionate. but it's definitely something that I would teach to a sales organization.
Right. At least you have the experience of having done it. So,
Yeah, I mean, I achieved number one in the world selling the technology that I sold. I
wow.
had a lot of success, and I wrote a few books about how I did it, and so I've got sales books that kind of talk about that process. And but in both of the sales books that I wrote, I mean, I'm very clear about 80-20, and the 20% is prospecting.
Where would you like our conversation to go next?
Wherever you want. Most of what I usually talk about is mindset, so that's where I'm most comfortable.
All right. Well, give us some of your insights that will help us on mindset then.
Well, we need to understand how to change it, and most people would agree that having a healthy mindset is very important, but most people do not know how we change our mindset. And but I will tell you that the conscious mind is, it's about 5% of what's going on in the course of a day. The subconscious mind is about 95% of what's going on in the course of a day. It's on autopilot most of the time. And that's where mindset lives. Mindset does not live in our conscious mind. Our mindset is ingrained down in the operating system. But the problem is we try to change it, say, break an old habit, create a new habit, set a lofty goal, start changing my talk track, become more positive, more optimistic. So all of these have to be done in the subconscious mind. But the problem is that we have a mental firewall, and it's called our critical faculty, and it's basically imagine that it's this critical faculty. We're going to call him Critical Carl, okay? And he's this 7 foot, 400 pound, muscle bound, basically guard who's standing at the only entrance to the subconscious mind. And he's not letting any new information through. He only allows through something that appears safe. And to him, it's only safe if it's familiar. So when we try to introduce new ideas, Critical Carl's not going to let it pass, and he does not accept fake IDs. So we're over here, trying to tell him how motivated we are and how we're this new version of ourselves. He ain't buying it. So if you want to change your mindset, you have to really change your subconscious mind. And if you want to change your subconscious mind, you better understand how to get past Critical Carl. Because if you don't, you'll do something new for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, but you're going to revert back because it never got past the analytical mind.
So, how do we get past it?
There's a couple ways to do it. Most of the ways have to do with getting the mind into the theta state. And the theta state would be like it's at night when you go to bed and you turn off the light and you're intentionally trying to go to sleep. The theta state is when we haven't fallen asleep yet, but we're starting to fall asleep. And that's where we call it the theta state, but it basically means Critical Carl is now on break. Okay, there is no Critical Carl. And so the problem is if you do it just before you go to bed, and kind of visualize and self-talk, the problem is that the only way you really change the subconscious mind is through frequency, right? Repetition. And although that state just before you fall asleep is very powerful, and I've done it for years, but it's only once a night. And so not a lot of frequency or repetition there. Other ways people do it is through hypnosis, because hypnosis, that's what it does. It basically, the hypnotist puts you in the theta state, right? You're awake, but your mind is kind of in that almost asleep phase. And that makes you that makes the subconscious mind very susceptible to new thoughts and ideas and change, because Critical Carl is on break. There's people that do it through meditation. And there's also people who do it through NLP. NLP is neuro linguistics programming, and it's very effective. It's been around a long time, but it takes a long time. I mean, you're basically retraining how to reframe everything you say, how you think. So there's no quick fix with NLP, and that's the long game. So most people, if you say, all right, well, you got to choose between NLP, meditation, uh, getting hypnotized, or that state just before you go to sleep, but that's only once a night. So most people really aren't all that interested in any one of those four choices. So I actually created a method that it works for people who want change right now, and I call it the Meta Q, METACUE, the Meta Q method. And that's for people who they're like, man, I need to make these changes right now. And I will tell you that, so it's just kind of a couple steps. So the first thing you do is you visualize what is my desired outcome. Okay. I want blah, blah, blah. And so the second thing you do is then you create a little 5-second video in your mind. And the video is something that you would only be doing if you achieve that goal. All right. So if I achieve that goal, I would be standing on the stage, receiving the award, whatever. And be very specific, because the subconscious mind loves emotional filled visualization. It loves it. And so, okay, I want to, win this award. And now here's the little 5-minute video. And then you basically you create a gratitude statement. I am so grateful that I won that award. And the reason you need a gratitude statement is because our subconscious mind, when we start speaking in gratitude, our subconscious mind assumes that it's happened. We usually don't speak in gratitude of what's going to happen. We usually are grateful for something that we have already attained or accomplished, right? A relationship, whatever. So when you kind of put that gratitude statement, the subconscious mind does not know the difference between truth and a lie. It doesn't know the difference between fiction, nonfiction, reality. It doesn't know the difference between 10 years from now and right now. Okay. So if I create that little 5-second video of that future memory that would only happen if I accomplish that outcome, that goal, and then I have that gratitude statement, I'm so grateful that I accomplished that goal. And then what we do is now we need the cue. So we pick a cue. So let's say my cue is going to be every time I check my phone. Well, the average American checks their phone about 90 plus times a day. All right. So every time I check my phone, I'm now going to run through that little 5-second loop. And under my breath, I'm going to say, I'm so grateful that and I may even just say it in my mind. Now that just happened 90 times a day. Your cue can be every time I sit, every time I stand, every time I walk through a doorway, every time I open something or close something, whatever, every time I take a drink of any kind of liquid. It's something that is going to, because the subconscious mind, what wears critical Carl down to where he finally says, all right, come on, is repetition tied with emotionally charged visualization. That's what critical Carl absolutely lets past the red velvet ropes. And so you create a desired outcome, you create a little 5-second future memory of it, you give it a gratitude statement, and then you pick your cue. And I often get people to say, all right, Chris, how long do I do this for? 30 days, 60 days? You do it until you don't have to think about it anymore. Because now that means it's now a new neural pathway. You've created a new automation. That's how we change our subconscious mind.
Wow. You know what? That makes perfect sense.
Well, and there's another really strong component to the MetaQ method, and that's one of the most powerful tools we have in our arsenal for changing ourselves, our subconscious mind, our mindset, is metacognition. And metacognition, it basically means thinking about what you're thinking. It goes way beyond awareness. I mean, awareness, I can't believe I just said that, or oh my gosh, I'm driving 20 miles over the speed limit and I'm glad I didn't get pulled over. That's awareness. Metacognition goes so much deeper than that, because look, there are things in our subconscious mind that should no longer longer be automated. Okay. We need to interrupt that. And if 90 times a day I pick up my phone and I immediately say, oh, every time I touch my phone, I'm going to run my future memory. I'm going to say my gratitude statement. What you're doing really 90 times a day is you're strengthening your metacognition, because you're thinking about what you're thinking and you're stopping automation for a moment and you're inserting something new that you want automated. And so you get the metacognition piece, it's kind of an added benefit to eventually achieving, because what will happen is the subconscious mind will start changing your behavior to give you that thing. Right. And we say, well, how is it going to change? It doesn't matter how. We don't get caught up in the how. It will.
I imagine you've got some pretty impressive testimonials after all this time, huh?
Yeah, one of my favorite ones for the MetaQ method is this. So the manufacturer who makes the technology that I sold, one of the largest manufacturers in the world for this technology, but they had a sales competition that they announced. And they said, hey, this year, whoever is number one in the world selling our technology is going to win a brand new convertible Porsche. Well, my wife has always wanted a convertible Porsche. And so that became my why. I adore my wife and I want to give that to her. And so I made the decision I was going to become number one in the world. And I was very driven by, no pun intended, by winning my wife that Porsche. And so I would imagine, so my little 5-second demo tape was me watching as an observer my wife drive by on a beautiful sunny day with a big smile on her face and the wind in her hair, driving that Porsche. And my statement was, I'm so grateful that my wife is driving the car of her dreams. And I assigned a cue to that, so it's happening multiple times. Well, fast forward to, January of the next year when they're having the big annual sales conference. But we're in the Hard Rock Hotel in San Diego, California. And I'm standing on the grand ballroom on the stage as they're handing me the keys to that Porsche. And it was a very familiar moment to me because I have played that thousands of times in my head. And so as it got challenging throughout that year, very competitive environment, very expensive equipment, everybody's wanting that Porsche. And, but I just kept remembering the why. And that was where I got my resilience. And the why was, I love my wife and my wife has always wanted this and I want to give her this.
That's awesome. I'm inspired. I imagine our listeners are too. I think that it's interesting to me. How did you come up with all of this? Like for example, this way to get your subconscious on board and stuff. Are these things that you learned from other people? Did you come up with it yourself? How did all that come to pass?
I think just watching, I taught close quarters combat to special forces, as a private contractor, as I'd mentioned earlier. And these guys, they're just the epitome of a strong mindset. They're the epitome of mental toughness. I mean, they're either going to find a way or they're going to make a way. And I think just watching them, I was just in awe, how they just consistently found new ways to push the human limit. And I just became so intrigued. And I just, I think out of respect and admiration and some disbelief, just the things that they could accomplish, like, my gosh, that bag weighs 80 pounds and you just carried it for 100 miles and you never complained once. And, and you did it with, blisters on your feet and the freezing cold. And I think it really inspired me to just understand how, you could have 300 men all go to trials, fighting for 30 slots. And what makes these 30 so unique that they could endure and get the trident, and make the team, and the other 200 and whatever 70 failed. They're all specimens. What's the difference between those 30 and the other 270? And I just kept pulling on the thread of the sweater. And
Right.
next thing you know, I'm teaching it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you've been a great guest, and I know that I'm inspired, and I expect the audience is as well. So I want to thank you for that. Um,
You're my pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
and I'll go ahead and send you a copy of the video and the audio, and you can use it as you see best, and,
Okay, thank you very much.
and we'll go from there. So, um, any parting comments, or are we good?
I'll give one parting comment. Never withhold love if it's within your power to give it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, I'm gonna end